My grandfather, Raymond L., was a lighthouse keeper off the Oregon coast for nearly 20 years. He passed away in 2009, but before he died, he told me a story that never left me. I was 16 at the time, and I remember the look on his face. He wasn't trying to scare me. He wasn't joking or exaggerating. He was just tired, like it had been weighing on him for a long time. This happened in 1983. He'd just been reassigned to a place called Bright Ridge Point. Not many people have heard of it. It's tucked into a jagged curve along the cliffs, technically still part of the mainland, but completely cut off by terrain. You could only get there by hiking a narrow trail that wound through steep switchbacks. Supplies came in twice a month by ATV. Power was limited to solar and a backup generator. There was no radio, just a shortwave and a landline that barely worked on stormy days. Bright Ridge was considered a legacy post. That meant the Coast Guard wanted to preserve it for history's sake, but didn't have the funding to modernize it. So they'd rotate solo keepers every few months. My grandfather said the place was already falling apart when he got there. Salt-crusted walls, a cracked lantern lens, and rusted stairs that groaned when you walked too fast. His first few weeks were quiet, lonely but peaceful. He kept a routine: sunrise checks on the beacon, midday maintenance, long afternoons reading or writing in his journal. He said it was the first time in years he'd felt like he could breathe. But that changed on the 11th night. It started with a sound: faint, rhythmic tapping coming from the lantern room upstairs. At first, he thought it was just the metal frame shifting in the wind. Normal stuff. But when he went up to check, there was nothing. No loose paneling, no wires brushing glass. Just the empty room, spinning slowly as the beacon turned. But the sound came back the next night, and again the night after. Always just after 2 a.m., always soft and deliberate. Not like creaking, more like fingers. Fingertips. He told himself it was just his imagination, but something about the timing felt off. So he stayed up the following night to catch it happening. Sure enough, right at 2:11 a.m., the tapping began. He crept upstairs with a flashlight, opened the hatch, and stepped into the lantern room. And that's when he saw it. A handprint. It was faint, barely visible on the inside of the glass, but it was there. 5 fingers, human-sized, and wet. He wiped it away, heart pounding. There was no one there. The hatch had been locked. The room was 30 feet off the ground with no exterior access. He didn't sleep that night. The next morning, he chalked it up to maybe his own handprint from cleaning the inside of the lens earlier. But then it happened again. Another handprint, different location, same time. He started locking the hatch with a heavy padlock, sealing the trapdoor with a steel latch. He welded himself. But the prints still showed up. Then came the reflection. One night, he was cleaning the lower gallery windows when he caught a glimpse of someone in the lantern room above. He froze. The silhouette was faint, just a shadow on the glass, but it was unmistakable. A man, standing completely still, watching him. He rushed upstairs, wrench in hand, ready to confront whoever was up there. But it was empty. He checked every inch of the room, even opened the hatch to the outer catwalk, but there was no one. Nothing. After that, things escalated. Lights started flickering, even when the generator was off. His tools would go missing, only to be found placed in strange spots, like balanced on the stair railing or lined up perfectly along the edge of his bed. He started keeping the lights on all night, sleeping in short bursts, exhausted, but afraid to close his eyes for too long. The worst moment came on his 27th day. He was standing at the base of the stairs, staring up into the tower, when he heard his own voice. It was faint, just a whisper, but it was undeniably his voice, repeating something he'd written in his journal days earlier. Some places weren't meant to be watched over. He said the air in that moment felt wrong, heavy, like the air before a storm, Except there were no clouds, no wind, just that stillness again. Like the world was holding its breath. Then the voice repeated the line again, louder, coming from above. He climbed the stairs, slowly, heart racing, thinking maybe someone had found an old recorder or radio left behind. But when he reached the lantern room, there was no device, no speaker, nothing, just a mirror. There had never been a mirror in that room, not before. It was propped up against the wall, a small rectangular one with a wooden frame, old and spotted with black patches like it had been pulled out of a basement. And in the reflection, he saw the room, the glass lens, the railing, and himself. But he wasn't moving. In the mirror, his reflection was standing still, mouth slightly open, eyes unfocused, frozen. He dropped the flashlight and turned to look behind him. His body moved. He turned his head. But in the mirror, nothing changed. The reflection didn't follow. He grabbed the mirror and threw it down the stairs. It shattered against the lower landing. But when he looked back toward the glass lens, there was a handprint again. But this time, it wasn't on the glass. It was inside it, like something was pressing from within. He stayed awake for 2 more nights, pacing, barely eating, watching the tower like it was a live animal that might strike at any moment. On the 3rd day, he called for an emergency evacuation, told the coast base that there was a possible structural failure. They picked him up that evening. He never went back to Bright Ridge. He finished out his contract at a mainland outpost and retired 6 months later. Before he died, he told me he didn't care if anyone believed him. He just wanted me to know that lighthouses aren't just lonely. They're watching you too. And some of them remember who you are. He said he sometimes dreams about that mirror, and that in the dreams, he's still in the reflection, still frozen, still waiting. If you enjoyed this story, please take a moment to subscribe the channel. Your support matters a lot. This happened to me back in 2011, when I was working as a freelance marine engineer. I used to get hired for offshore inspections, checking aging coastal structures, old oil rigs, radio towers, and sometimes old lighthouses that hadn't been used in decades. I'm not one to spook easily. Grew up around the sea. Storms, power outages, and weird noises, all just part of the job. But there's one job I still can't explain. Not logically, not professionally, and definitely not without getting that feeling in my chest, like my heart's crawling up my throat. It was a lighthouse located off the coast of northern Michigan on Lake Superior. Locals just called it the Tooth. That wasn't its real name. On the old maps, it's listed as something like Mariner's Point Light. But everyone called it the Tooth because of the way it jutted up from the rocks like a white fang. Tall, thin, and weirdly sharp-looking. It had been decommissioned in the 1970s and left to rot ever since. The job was supposed to be quick. Go in, assess the support columns, check the beacon housing, and file a safety report so the county could decide whether to restore it or tear it down. I'd done similar jobs dozens of times before. They always gave you a heads up about structural risks, wildlife hazards, unstable ladders, things like that. But nobody warned me about what I'd actually find out there. I took a small private boat out just before sunrise. Fog was already thick, clinging low to the water like smoke. When the tower came into view, it didn't look abandoned. Not exactly. The glass at the top still gleamed. The white paint had mostly peeled, but someone had clearly tried to scrub parts of it recently. And there were fresh footprints in the sand around the base of the rocks. Not boots, bare feet. I called in on the radio to confirm I was on site. No signal. Not surprising, given the location. I anchored the boat and climbed up onto the rock ledge with my gear. There were 2 structures, the tower itself and a tiny shed off to the side that once housed batteries and wiring. The door to the shed was ajar. I peeked inside. Empty. Just dust, some rusted tools, a collapsed shelf, and a metal bucket full of standing rainwater. The tower door was locked with an old rusted latch. I had to pry it open with a crowbar. The inside smelled like mildew and damp stone. The metal stairs spiraled up, narrow and steep, with open slits in the wall where the original ventilation used to be. As I climbed, I heard it. A knock, just one. Sharp, like a knuckle on glass. It came from above. I froze mid-step, flashlight trembling in my grip. I called out, "Hello? Anyone up there?" Silence. I climbed the rest of the way slowly, testing each step. When I reached the lantern room, the door was open. The glass was clean, surprisingly clean, given the state of the place. But there was something smeared on the inside. A shape. At first, I thought it was sea salt or dust. But when I looked closer, it was a handprint. It wasn't just any handprint. It was massive. Bigger than my hand by a few inches, with strange, elongated fingers. And on the tips of each finger, there were small circular marks, like scars or burns. I wiped it away, feeling uneasy. I checked the rest of the room. Nothing out of place. The beacon mechanism had been ripped out decades ago. Just some empty wires dangling where the bulb used to be. I took my notes, snapped a few pictures, and was about to head back down when I saw it. On the outside of the glass, across from where I'd just wiped the handprint, there was a face, pressed right up against the glass from the outside. I didn't scream, but I stumbled so hard I nearly fell backward. My flashlight clattered to the floor and rolled. By the time I looked back up, the face was gone. I rushed to the narrow hatch that led to the outside walkway, the catwalk that wraps around the top. I flung the door open, but no one was there. Wind hit me in the face, cold and sharp. The catwalk was empty. The ladder down the side was covered in rust, hadn't been touched in years. No ropes, no harnesses, no equipment that would let anyone climb up that far without being seen. But someone, or something, had been out there. I backed into the lantern room and locked the hatch. I started down the stairs, heart hammering in my chest, trying to convince myself it was just a trick of the glass. A warped reflection, a smudge that looked like a face. But then I noticed something. There was a puddle on the stairs. Not a leak, not rain. It was muddy, like someone with wet feet had been walking just ahead of me. I followed it, step after step, until I reached the ground floor. The door I'd crowbarred open? It was shut, bolted from the inside. I hadn't touched it. I stood there for what felt like hours, just listening. The wind had gone still. No gulls, no waves, no movement. Just me, the stone walls, and the sound of my own breath. I opened the door slowly and stepped outside. The fog had thickened, but I could still see the outline of the shed. And that's when I saw him. The same face from the glass, now standing inside the shed. He didn't move, just stood there, his features half lit by the flashlight I'd left hanging by the door. His skin was pale, bluish almost, and his eyes were wide open. I couldn't tell if he was alive or something else. I didn't wait to find out. I ran, full sprint, back to the boat, nearly slipped off the rocks twice. I fired up the motor and didn't look back until I was 100 yards out. The lighthouse stood quiet, still. But in the upper glass room, I swear I saw the handprint again. When I got back to shore, I filed a report, just like I was supposed to. But I left out what I saw. Who would believe it? A few weeks later, I heard the county sold the land to a private buyer, some historian from Chicago who wanted to restore the tooth and turn it into a museum. I never heard if they followed through. I didn't want to know. But I did hear one thing from a contractor I worked with years later. Apparently, during the first week of the restoration, one of the workers refused to go back after he saw a face in the glass. He told his foreman the man was staring at him. But the scariest part? That glass had already been removed 2 days earlier. Back in 2015, I worked for a small historical preservation group in Maine. We weren't government, just a private nonprofit that focused on restoring New England's old coastal structures. Most of it was slow, uneventful work, restoring shingles, documenting old maps, writing grant proposals. But every once in a while, we'd get called to inspect something way off the radar. That's how I ended up at Hollow Cape Light. You won't find much about it online. No official listing, no tourist photos. It doesn't show up on lighthouse directories anymore. From what we could tell, it was decommissioned in the late 1940s after a series of equipment failures, which was government speak for "we stopped trying." We got a letter from a private landowner saying they'd bought a parcel of coastal property near an old fishing village, and they believed there was a lighthouse on it, buried in trees and overgrowth. They wanted to know if it had any historical value. So, I volunteered to go. It was a solo trip. The others were tied up with a restoration project inland, and I didn't mind being alone. I liked the quiet. Thought it would be a peaceful weekend. Just me, some gear, and an old stone tower. But that place wasn't peaceful. It wasn't even empty. I reached the site after hiking a 2-mile trail off the main road. The path was barely visible, but eventually I came to a clearing. Half swamp, half overgrowth. And there it was. The lighthouse was crumbling but still upright, about 40 feet tall, covered in ivy, leaning just slightly to the west, like it had tried to fall, but hadn't quite made it. The surrounding building, a tiny keeper's house, was mostly collapsed. The roof caved in, one wall missing. A few rusted oil drums sat outside, and an old signpost lay flat in the weeds. The letters were so faded, you could barely make out the name. Hollow Cape Light. I set up camp just outside the structure and started photographing the site. The tower door was missing, so I stepped right in. Immediately, the air changed. It wasn't just musty, it was cold. Colder than it should have been for early autumn, and it smelled like something old had been sealed in there for a long, long time. I climbed the stairs carefully, testing each one. They creaked, but held. At the top, the lantern room had no glass left, just an open frame and a rusted beacon shell, now hollow and dead. I sat down on a metal beam and ate my lunch, watching the trees sway below. And then I noticed something odd. A chair. It was sitting against the far wall, perfectly placed. Not tipped over. Not broken. Just sitting there. Clean, like someone had dusted it recently. That made no sense. Even weirder? On the floor next to the chair was a logbook. A real one. The kind lighthouse keepers used to write in daily. Notes about storms, tides, ships passing. This one had a cracked leather cover. When I opened it, the pages were dry, but the ink was still legible. At first it was boring stuff. June 12th, light maintained, fog from east, no vessels visible. June 13th, rain, beacon lit, waves rough. But then the tone started shifting. June 15th, heard knocking from lower stairs, no one there. June 16th, saw reflection of man in glass, room was empty. Then it got worse. June 18th, light rotated on its own, I had turned it off. June 19th, dreamed of someone standing at the door, woke to it swinging open. The final entry stopped me cold. June 21st, he won't leave the mirror. I don't think he's me anymore. I read it twice, then 3 times. The hairs on the back of my neck were standing up. I looked around. The room was quiet, still, but the air felt heavy, like I was being watched. I packed the logbook carefully into my bag and climbed down the stairs faster than I should have. I didn't sleep that night. I zipped myself into my tent and just listened. The trees creaked, wind moved through the branches, but every now and then I'd hear something different, a soft, dragging sound, like someone slowly walking in boots across old stone. The next morning, I planned to leave early, but something stopped me. When I stepped out of my tent, I saw fresh footprints leading into the tower. Mine had been the only set the day before. These were different, bigger, wider, and spaced oddly, like whoever made them wasn't walking naturally. I didn't want to go back inside, but I had to see where they went. So I followed them, back up the stairs, step by step, until I reached the top. There was no one in the lantern room, but the chair had moved. It was now facing the corner, and on the wall behind it, someone had drawn a symbol, a spiral, almost like a maze, etched deeply into the stone with something sharp. It hadn't been there yesterday. I would have seen it. I turned around to leave, and that's when I noticed the mirror. It hadn't been there before either. Just a small rectangle of glass propped up on the floor. I froze. In the reflection, I saw the room, the chair, the rusted beacon, the open frame of the lantern, and me. Except I wasn't facing the mirror. In the reflection, I was still turned toward the spiral, but I was smiling. I backed away, not blinking, heart thudding in my chest. Then the smile in the mirror widened. I ran. I didn't stop until I hit the trail again. I didn't even grab my tent. I drove straight back to town and mailed the logbook to our archives without even opening the box again. 2 weeks later, I went to look up records about Hollow Cape Light, but there was nothing. No Coast Guard registry, no decommissioning notice, just a line in an old 1937 newspaper clipping. Second keeper in 4 years found incoherent, removed from Hollow Cape, structure to be shuttered indefinitely. That was it. I never went back. And sometimes, late at night, I dream of that mirror. I see myself in it, except I'm not me anymore. And I swear he's still watching, waiting for me to return. If these stories creeped you out, please do hit the like and subscribe button.